Okay, great.
Better now.
All right. So my name is Krista Gorman. I'm a physician assistant, trained as a physician assistant. I'm a human being, really. Spiritual being in a human body. I work in a very busy emergency room in Venice, Florida. And I had a near-death experience 14 years ago when I had my daughter, who's with me today. She's a cute little blonde that walks around with me. And the circumstances around my near-death experience I'll just get into briefly, and then I'll start talking about the 12 principles that I arrived at as a result of my experience. I was in labor, and it was an induction. I was to have my daughter a week early due to a medical issue she had. And during the induction, I went into cardiorespiratory arrest, and I was clinically dead without a pulse for 8 minutes. Now, my experience was an out-of-body experience where my energy accumulated into a sort of a cloud-like space above my body, and I was observing a movie below. And it was a very interesting movie. At first, I was very detached from it, and then as I remained there and watched what was going on below, I started to become more attached to it. And then a force started to pull me away, and I resisted it just for an instant. And as soon as I acquiesced, it took me. And it took me to what we call the afterlife, where I did experience the blissful return to love and had all my questions answered that I've ever had in my life. And I was also given and chose an experience of being in a place where there were other spirit beings that wanted me to help them. And in my life, I'd always been somebody who gave of herself at the sacrifice of herself. That was something that had always been a challenge for me. I had gotten a degree in psychology because I wanted to understand me, and I wanted to help you understand you. I got into the medical field to help people, but I would sacrifice myself in the process. So in this place, I was bombarded by these spirits wanting my help. And at first I wanted to help all of them, but I knew that I couldn't. I knew that I needed to take care of myself first, and that I was there in that moment for me. Once I made the decision to leave that room, that place, I did. And I was given my Eden. I was given my choices. And I did experience what I call benevolent spirits, angels as we call them. And I chose to come back. Now when I came back, I did not want to talk about my experience. Initially I did, but then I realized that people didn't really understand me, so then I just sort of stuffed it. And I stuffed it for 10 years. Partly because I was a newly graduated physician assistant. I graduated 3 weeks before my death. And when I came back, I had to relearn a lot of things. I had forgotten a lot of things. And it was very frustrating for me. And I had to concentrate on that. I'd spent many years of my life training, and I couldn't sacrifice that. So I did. I spent a lot of time studying, raising my daughter, working, and over time my near-death experience just became what I called static in the background. I would be poked and prodded by it often in its desire for me to express it into the world, and I would push it away because I wasn't ready. Ultimately, I wasn't ready to process it. Then a crisis hit me and my family. It hit me because I had spent so much time pushing this experience away, and essentially pushing myself away. It made me physically sick, it made me spiritually sick, and it adversely affected my daughter. At the same time, my husband, who we've been together for forever, since I'm 43 years old, and we met when I was 21. He was a touring musician for 20 years in a rock band, and he had severely neglected his health, and it caught up with him. He got very, very ill, and it was a prolonged illness, and at times we didn't know if he was going to live or die. During that process, I never felt more alive in my life. It was an amazing experience. Being on that brink of just not knowing which direction my life was going to go, was incredibly invigorating. It was so scary, but I knew that we had the strength to endure it, and I knew that it was my near-death experience that gave me that strength. So I stopped ignoring it during that period of time, and I started to listen and allow it to enter into my life, and little synchronicities started to occur. I would see, my daughter was born on July 17th, I would see 7/17 everywhere. I'd glance at the clock, it was 7/17. I'd be seeing a patient, their birthday, 7/17. So I realized at that point, I really need to start listening. So I came up with, during that process of healing, I came up with what I call 12 principles for living, or for daily living. And there are things that I developed to help myself to live my daily life and to heal and to get better, because I knew that they would be the thing that would help me. And I realized that what I was moving towards was being who I am, who I learned I was in the afterlife. And they are the things that healed me. Now, when I began to heal, my family began to heal. My husband was getting better. He was spiritually sick, which is what made him physically sick. And he was getting better very slowly. I practiced these principles. I modeled them for my family. My daughter started to change. She had been having her own difficulties at the time, and she started to change and get better, I say. So our family was healing, and I realized that, okay, I'm paying attention to my near-death experience and what it showed me, and now I need to share it. That's what I had told my angels I would do. I would share it. And I had spent far too long making myself sick by keeping who I really was under wraps. So I wrote a book called I Died and Learned How to Live, and that is a brief story about my near-death experience in my life that followed it, and then the 12 principles. And the main point of the 12 principles is awareness, and it's awareness in everything that we do. And the fundamental part of being aware is knowing that we are the physical incarnation of the love of the universe, that every part of us is love, that I share the love of the universe with you, you share the love of the universe with me, and whether you call it God, Allah, Buddha, whatever, it's all the same. It all returns to love in the afterlife. So the principles: living in awareness of who and what we are, living willingly, and willingness is to allow for whatever the lesson is in our life to come through and to live through that, because the lessons that we have are really created by us and for us. So when we're living in the awareness of who we are, and when we're willing to allow for the lessons to come through, then we can proceed and improve our lives through those first two principles. Now, I put in here to live lovingly. To live lovingly is simply to be who you are, because we are love. To express love in our lives is another story in a way, because we have to move through ego in order to do that. And the ego is there to provide a contrast to love. It has to be there. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to recognize the true love that we are fully in this life. The next principle is to live fearlessly. Now, living fearlessly means to relinquish ego and to present ourselves in our lives as the love that we are. The fear that I had tremendous fear after having my near-death experience. It was a fear that kept my story under wraps for over 10 years. That was partly because I was trained in medicine. I was terrified of the judgment of my peers, and I assumed that they would judge me harshly. What I've come to find out is that they actually have an appreciation for the afterlife, near-death experiences and things like that, which I found so refreshing when I did start to talk about it. But my own fear of showing the world who I am is what kept me stuck and sick and unhappy, so unhappy. Now, the the next principle, to live compassionately, this is something that I always felt that I had compassion for people. But what I realized is that the feelings that I had for other people suffering was really, what it came from is my own suffering. I identified with them through the suffering, which was an essential thing to do. However, I did it more because I looked at them as through me. I didn't look at them from a detached point of view. So to live compassionately is to identify yourself in the other person, but to do it in a detached way where you're not absorbing their problems, their pain, their issues. To live patiently is the next principle, and that is to allow for the unfolding of life on life's terms, to not push through what you want, what your agenda is, but instead to just allow for that moment to be that moment. And then live presently is to practice that patience. To live presently is the next principle. When we are fully present in the moment, we allow for the unfolding of life, again, to its highest possibilities. When we're thinking about the past or spending too much time in the future, then we don't allow the given moment to have any kind of strength, to have any kind of creative possibility for us. Presently, purposefully, to live purposefully is the next principle, and that is something that I never really thought I really had a purpose. And what I fundamentally learned was that the purpose that we all have is simply in being here, is in being the incarnation of the love of the universe, and that is our purpose. To be anything other than that is the icing, I guess I would say, on the cake, but not really, because love is really the everything. So the next point I come to is the next principle is to live spiritually, and spirituality is something that is such a broad subject, but I went and spent a little bit of time reading what other people had written about spirituality. And the traditional definition of spirituality, which I thought was very interesting, is personal transformation in accordance with religious ideals. And I guess that's an old-fashioned definition of it. But it does speak of personal transformation, which that holds all religions on an equal footing, because all religions, in some regard, are advocating personal transformation. And the modern definition is more oriented to a subjective experience, leading to some sort of a psychological growth. Now, that points me more towards what we're talking about here in near-death experiences. It's the subjective experience of whatever it is, it's an event in your existence here that moves you forward in your psychological growth, whether it's out of body or encountering angels or benevolent spirits in your life, or having a near-death experience. The next principle that I list is to live faithfully. Now, to live faithfully is to believe that there is a possibility to live your life to the fullest before you're able to actually experience it. Because faith is based in, is sort of a happening to the actual experience of something. Once you've experienced it, then you don't need to have faith. You have the experience. So not to say that faith is not necessary, because faith is needed so that it can lead you to the experience. I love this principle. It's live creatively. Creativity in life is so important. It's what we are. We're the creative expression of the universe. I call the universe. We're created through its benevolent love for us, through its infinite love for us. And after we come here, we are given the ability to then co-create. And we're given that through the ego, because the ego has to be there in order to understand the contrast. So then as we go through our lives and create, we oftentimes feel like we don't have any say in it. There's many of us who feel that, I'm speaking for myself too, that life happens to me. And until I became aware of who and what I am, I lived my life that way. And now it's a very different story. I live a creative life, and every decision that I make is a creative decision to further create my life. The last one, I'm sorry I have to keep looking at this. I know my principles, but I'm nervous. So I have to keep glancing to make sure I don't mess up. But the last one is to live miraculously. And oh my gosh, there's miracles everywhere. And I know, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. You know what I mean? All of you know about the miracles. Every single one of us is a miracle. I was referred to as a miracle by my physician who delivered Maggie. He referred to Maggie as a special kind of miracle. And this is after the fact. This is 14 years after the fact that he said this. And I'll give you a little bit of that backstory. He delivered Maggie. It was very traumatic. I was in the ICU for 3 days. I survived the 8 minutes without a heartbeat. I then began to bleed out of every orifice in my body uncontrollably. I had to be transfused. They didn't think I was going to make it through that. And I did, and I was out of the ICU in 3 days. After yelling at the nurses and telling them I'm a physician assistant and I'm working for Dr. Robert Ford. They were like, okay, I guess she's all right. Maggie did fine. She's now in a gifted school, and she is stronger physically and oftentimes emotionally, mentally than I am. She is an old soul, and my physician, I emailed him several months ago, and just to put sort of remedy that situation. I'd never talked to him about it, and I found him on email, and I sent this email, and he emailed me back within 5 minutes. And he just said the events of that day were incredible. You're a miracle. Your daughter is a special kind of miracle, and I'm just so happy for the both of you that it's turned out this way. So getting back to spirituality itself, I love the word and I dislike the word. Again, we're all spiritual beings in physical bodies. Spirituality, I suppose, is the practice of that. To bring the wisdom and the love of the universe through us, through this body, and sharing it with everyone, to me, is spirituality. And that's all I have today. And I thank you very much for listening so patiently.